Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Avirma Edhi Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Te Namam Pahi Nityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the ever-changing to the unchanging. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through, and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good morning. Our topic today is glimpses of Swami Abhedananda, and this is part of a series on the monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, in which we try to go to first-hand accounts as much as possible to find out what it was like to be in the immediate presence of these great souls. Of the 5 of Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciples who lived and worked in the West, Swami Abhedananda spent by far the most time here, almost 25 years. Most of that time in America, in and around New York City. He also traveled widely, 17 round trips by steamer between America and Europe. He founded many Vedanta centers, both in America and in Europe. He lectured and wrote prolifically. His collected works run into 11 volumes. And he was no shy wallflower. When he saw someone important, he'd go up and he'd meet them and he'd talk to them. He'd have direct interaction. He met President Woodrow Wilson in the White House in 1898. He talked to Thomas Edison in his laboratory in New Jersey. And many academics, many important people in American and European culture. And many clergymen, mostly liberal clergymen. Swami Abhedananda is also the only direct disciple of Ramakrishna that we know of that visited St. Louis. He was here from late May to mid-June in 1904 at the St. Louis World Fair. He had a book display at the book fair that was associated with the fair. And he spoke in Webster Groves at the Women's Exchange. He was again here in 1905 on his way back to New York City from an extensive tour in the western part of the continent that went all the way from Alaska down to Mexico City. He stopped and spoke informally to a group of about 50 people in St. Louis on his way back to New York. And just so that this is out there on the record, the property that we own here on South Skinker Boulevard was part of the World's Fairgrounds in 1904. There was no building on it, but behind us was the largest building in the fair, the agricultural building, and can't be proven, of course, but it is possible that Swami Abhedananda walked on our property on his way around the fair. That would be nice. And I like to kind of entertain the idea that the ground that we're on was hallowed by the feet of a direct disciple of the Master. I want to start with an outline of Swami Abhedananda's life, and then we'll fit in some of the material about him into the timeline in roughly chronological order. His early life, he was born in 1866 in Calcutta, and his early life would be from his birth to the time that he met Sri Ramakrishna when he was about 17 or 18. And then from June of 1884 to August of 1886, his time with Sri Ramakrishna. From 1886 to 1892, he was at the Baranagar Mat in Calcutta initially, but he traveled widely throughout India. Probably Vivekananda is the only one who traveled more widely than Swami Abhedananda. He had tremendous energy, tremendous enthusiasm, tremendous stamina, and really good health. From 1892 to August 1896, he was in and around Calcutta for the most part at the Alambazar Mat. And during 4 months of that period, he was quite ill with an infection that he picked up during his wanderings and was nursed back to health by Swami Saradananda. From 1896 to 1910, that was the first phase of his work in the West. He was called to London by Swami Vivekananda and took up the work there in 1896, and for about a year he was there. And then he was again called by Vivekananda to go to America to pick up the work that Swami Saradananda had started on the East Coast. Swami Saradananda was recalled to India to become the executive head of the fledgling Ramakrishna organization. So he was in charge of the New York Center, but he was traveling all over the place and lecturing widely in different venues to huge audiences. 500-600 people was not unusual, and writing prolifically. This was the active phase of his work in the West. And then from 1910 to 1919, he led kind of a retired life on a 370-acre retreat that had been purchased in the Berkshires in Connecticut, about 4 hours from New York City. And close students of his would live there and work with him, and he rolled up his sleeves and worked with them, cleaned the dog houses, planted the garden, weeded, chopped wood, all that sort of thing. This he did in his 40s and early 50s. And then from 1919 to 1921, he slowly made his way back to India, spending a year in San Francisco, helping Prakashananda start the center there, and gathering many disciples around him and students. Worked about 6 months in Los Angeles, attended a Pan-American conference in Honolulu, and went back across the Pacific to India, arriving there before Swami Brahmananda's demise in 1922. So from 1921 to 1939, he was in India, but again he traveled widely. In 1922, at the age of 56, he went on foot to Tibet. Can you imagine in those days? To do some research on the lost years of Jesus. It was just amazing. And he separated himself in some ways from the Ramakrishna movement. He remained a trustee of the Ramakrishna order until his death, and he was the last of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna to pass away. But he founded his own organization, the Ramakrishna Vedanta Mat in Calcutta, and a retreat center in Darjeeling, the Ramakrishna, what was it called? Ramakrishna Vedanta Ashram in Darjeeling. And he had his own course of action that was a little different, but not completely separate from the Ramakrishna orders. And he's also the only direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna to have written an autobiography. It's called My Life Story. So the early part of his life will go to that to get the, because his own words are very full of life and vigor and humor. My father, Rasik Lal Chandra, was born in the city of Calcutta in 1822. He passed the seminar examination of those days in the English language in the Oriental Seminary School and taught the English there continuously for 25 years. At that time, there were only 2 non-missionary schools where Bengali boys could be educated in the English language. Many gentlemen of Calcutta acquired proficiency in the English language at that school, and many of those were students of my father. Mention may be made of a few of them. Vishwanath Datta, Swami Vivekananda's father, Krishnadas Pal, Girish Chandra Ghosh, his younger brother Atul Krishna Ghosh, and Suresh Chandra Mitra, a lay disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, were all the students in the English language of Swami Abhedananda's father. Rasik Master, as he was called, was looked upon with reverence and high regard, and those great men used to make pranams to him if they saw him on the street of Calcutta. His neighbors would ask him to help them with the English language and to speak for them to the English officers that ran the government. He married twice. His first marriage, he had a son and a daughter. His wife died. And to his great chagrin and heartache, his first son, Biharilal, went to a missionary school and converted to Christianity and would try to convert others to Christianity. He thought of committing suicide, the father did. And while he was seriously contemplating it, he heard a voice saying, "There's no reason to do that. You can marry again." He was, and so he married a second time, and this time he married Swami Abhedananda's mother. We'll talk about her in a bit. But this great shock of having his son convert to Christianity affected him deeply. He was a truthful, virtuous, benevolent, and just man who believed in the oneness of God. After Biharilal had taken to Christianity, my father read the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and other scriptures, and came to the conclusion that God is one and non-dual and has numerable names and forms. He wrote this in bold letters, got it framed, and hung it on the wall in his room. In 1850, Rasik Master took a second wife. 9 sons were born of that marriage. Among them, 5 died at a tender age. I was the second of the surviving 4 sons. Long before my birth, my pious mother, Nayantara Devi, used to go to Kalighat and pray to the goddess Kali for a son who would be of saintly character, virtuous, and a yogi. This is from his autobiography. I was born on the 17th of Ashwin, 1273 BS, that is the 2nd of October, 1866 AD, at 10 p.m., in the 9th waning phase of the moon. I was born on that auspicious day and in that auspicious hour at my paternal home. My mother named me Kali Prasad, as she had obtained a son through the grace of the goddess Kali. When speaking to a student and devotee of mine many years later, my mother told them, when your Swami Maharaj, that means Abhedananda, when your Swami Maharaj was born, his whole body was wound up with the umbilical cord. At this, the nurse in attendance said, this child must be some great soul who has been drawn out of the state of yoga. He looks as if he were reluctant to be born, so someone tied him up and sent him here. The members of the household ran to see the child. My father told the nurse, you better cut the umbilical cord. She cut the cord, but the child lay with eyes closed for about an hour. The child would neither move nor cry. The nurse said, don't worry, the child is absorbed in meditation. His meditation is not yet over. Have no anxiety. With a slight touch of chili powder on the eyelid, the child cried out, and after 10 minutes was bathed in warm water. We don't get this kind of description of the birth of the other direct disciples. My mother said, I had prayed to the goddess Kali in Kali God for a virtuous and saintly son. Mother Kali has sent this son in fulfillment of that prayer. When Kali Prasad was 6 months old, I took him to Kali God and offered him at the feet of Mother Kali. From my childhood, I had immense respect for my mother. If I was offered any food, I would first give it to my mother and say, Ma, please keep this portion for yourself. I'll eat what's left. She was very devout and pious, an ideal of Hindu motherhood. Every day after bathing and daily worship, she would read one chapter out loud from the Ramayana and one chapter from the Mahabharata, and she would take nothing to eat before finishing all this. I would sit next to her when she read and listen. Whenever there would be a recital of the Ramayana or the life of Sri Krishna in our neighborhood, my mother would take me along. Thus, I was able to appreciate the magnificent characters of the epics and the ideals of Hinduism from an early age. He went to primary school at the age of 5 and was a brilliant student from the very beginning. At the age of 10, I left primary school and got admission to the Oriental Seminary where my father taught. I had a special aptitude for mathematics in which I got high marks and was awarded medals. When I started reading Sanskrit grammar by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, it seemed as though impressions from a previous birth were awakened within, and having finished those grammars in a very short time, began to study more advanced grammar, which was really beyond my age, but not a problem. I did that at home. And then in those days, there was a Sanskrit school that I went to, on my own, in addition to my schoolwork. In that Sanskrit school, I finished the study of Sanskrit textbooks, starting with the fables of the Hitopadesha and later Kalidas's poetic works such as Shakuntala. At that time, I could easily translate from English into Sanskrit. I learned the meters of Sanskrit poetry and started to compose that as well. My interest was not only in academics. In order to strengthen my muscles, I used to swim at the time when I was bathing in the Ganges. learning that skill from my companions. While reading a school text on Indian history, Wilson's History of India, I came to know about Shankaracharya and became greatly attracted. I had a great desire to know all about his life and teachings. I was especially attracted to non-dualistic Vedanta, and a desire grew that I would be a great philosopher. Drawing had been introduced in the Oriental Seminary. I joined that class in order to learn art and diligently applied myself. The drawing master was pleased with my skill and started to teach me advanced courses. Then the question arose whether I would be a painter or a philosopher. And I couldn't solve it. It was a dilemma for me. Suddenly, the solution dawned on me, and I went to the drawing master and said, "Sir, I shall not to come to your drawing class again." Well, why not? I said, "Sir, after some deliberation, I've come to the conclusion it is better to be a philosopher than to be a painter, so I shall not learn painting anymore." "But," said the drawing master, "Kali Prasad, in my view, it is better to be a painter than a philosopher, for an artist is greater." Hearing this, I said, "I've thought it over, sir. A painter studies the surface of things, but a philosopher goes below the surface and studies the cause. So I will be a philosopher." From my boyhood, I would put various questions to my father, who was a well-educated, very intelligent man. And listening to those questions, my father used to say, "I haven't seen a child being so inquisitive at your age." My elder brother and I reared pigeons and other birds in our house. I had the ability to exactly imitate, through observation, the art of angling, that is fishing, playing cricket, bargaining for things at the market, cooking, making chapatis, woodworking, bookbinding, gardening, etc. Since boyhood, my concentration was very sharp. I would not forget what I heard once and could grasp and understand the cause and secret of everything with little effort. I used to read everything I could lay my hands on. And I would buy those books, saving my school money that was given to me for tiffin. I saw a copy of the Bhagavad Gita in my father's library and started to read it at the age of 14. Seeing me read it, my father snatched it and said, "This book is not suitable for you at your age. You'll become mad if you read the Gita at this age," and hid the book. I immediately turned the house upside down searching for it. When I found it, my joy knew no bounds. I, in my turn, hid the book, and late at night, when everyone was fast asleep, I would light an oil lamp and read it with great joy. As he grew older, he started participating in the culture, the wider cultural milieu of Calcutta, which was the British capital of India, and attending lectures by all the notable adults, Keshab Chandra Sen and all the, even the Christian missionary preachers who were very good at speaking. He had this curiosity to know everything. And he wanted to know, he knew Sanskrit, he wanted to know about the scriptures, and approached Pandit Shashadhar, who knew Sri Ramakrishna, to see if he would teach him the yoga aphorisms of Patanjali. And Shashidhar didn't have time, but he said, I want to. I just don't have time. Sent him to another pundit. And he didn't have time either. He was translating them from Sanskrit into Bengali, very busy. He said, the only time I have is when my servant is massaging me from 8 to 9 in the morning. And if you come and read the aphorisms to me while I'm being massaged, I'll explain them to you. So Kali said, sure, fine. I mean, it didn't bother him. You know, he'd do it, he'd show up. And that's how I learned that. He says, I had a strong desire to read other books of yoga philosophy. I bought the Shiva Samhita. In this book, the methods of Hatha Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, Pranayama, and Raja Yoga are explained in detail. But that scripture and other books of yoga state that yoga has to be learned from a preceptor who has attained the realization of God. Practicing yoga by reading books will not yield happy results. So the desire grew within him to find a realized teacher from whom he could learn the secret of samadhi. And this is his description of his first meeting with Sri Ramakrishna. June 1884, Kali went to Dakshineswar. In his own words, I became restless to find a guru who could teach me yoga. I confided my desire to my classmate, Yogeshwar Bhattacharya, who was very fond of me. It just so happened that he knew somebody. Yogeshwar was the son of the family guru of Balaram Bose. So he saw quite a bit of Sri Ramakrishna. And so he says, Yogeshwar told me, I know a wonderful yogi. His name is Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and he lives in Rani Rashmani's temple garden. He has no pretensions. Many respectable people visit him, and he sometimes comes to Calcutta. Perhaps he can fulfill your desire to learn yoga. My joy knew no bounds. And I at once resolved to meet Sri Ramakrishna, though I had no idea whatsoever where Dakshineswar was. He asked his mother, do you know where Dakshineswar is? She didn't know either. Sunday morning, I went out for my usual walk, and somehow my mind said, why don't you go to Dakshineswar? So, on an impulse, I started for Dakshineswar by asking directions of anyone I could find on the street. You've gone the wrong way, someone said. The Kali temple's on the bank of the Ganges. Finally, exhausted, I reached the temple garden at 11 a.m. When I asked about Ramakrishna, a worker there said he'd gone to Calcutta. I was exhausted, having walked all the way, and in all the various directions that I walked, barefoot in the sun. I sat on the steps of Sri Ramakrishna's northern veranda and wondered how I could get back to Calcutta. I hadn't eaten, I was hungry, thirsty, dead tired, and I hadn't a penny. I had not told my family where I was going or what I was doing. I didn't know anyone at Dakshineswar, and moreover, I had no strength to walk back to Calcutta. I began to cry. I thought, and in that mood, I thought, if only someone could help me. I prayed. Just then, another young man arrived and asked me about Sri Ramakrishna. When I told him he'd gone to Calcutta, he too was disappointed. On inquiry, I learned that his name was Shashi. That was Shashi Chakrabarti. It was his second or third visit to Sri Ramakrishna, and he later became Swami Ramakrishnananda. Sashi oriented me. He said, have a bath in the Ganges, take prasad, and then go back to Calcutta after you're rested. Later in the afternoon, when I expressed my intention to go back now, Sashi said, look. See, Sashi was about 3 years older, so at that age it makes a difference. Look, you shouldn't return home without seeing Sri Ramakrishna. Is there any certainty that such an opportunity will come again in your lifetime? Since you have come to see him with so much trouble, it is better that you wait. I was in a quandary. My parents would be worried. I never left home without previously informing them. Understanding this, Sashi said, look, brother, I've also come here without informing my parents. Don't worry, we'll stay here tonight. The master will positively return from Calcutta by late evening, as he doesn't stay overnight at anyone's house in Calcutta. I saw the Vesper service. My heart was at ease. My newfound friend had set my heart at ease. Finally, a horse carriage arrived at the northeastern corner of the master's room, and Sashi and Ramlal, Ramakrishna's nephew, went to receive him. My heart was beating hard in my chest. I stood there, motionless. After getting down from the carriage, Sri Ramakrishna said, Kali, 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 and entered the room. Of course, that was Kali's name, too. Ramlal and Sashi. Now, Ramlal had been recruited to give them food and a spare piece of cloth after they'd taken their bath, and he was in on this now. Ramlal came out and told me that the master was ready to see me. I entered the room, made pranams. The master asked about me, and I said, I have a desire to learn yoga. Will you kindly teach me? He kept quiet and then said, it's a good sign that you have this desire to learn yoga at your young age. You were a yogi in your previous life. A little is now left for perfection. This will be your last birth. Yes, I shall teach you yoga. Rest here tonight and see me tomorrow morning. The next morning, entering his room, I again bowed down. He asked me what I was studying. I said, I'm in the entrance class. Very good. Then he took me to the northern veranda and asked me to sit on a cot. I sat down in the full lotus posture, and the master said, stick out your tongue. When I did that, he wrote a mantra on it with the middle finger of his right hand and told me to meditate on Mother Kali. I did what he said. Gradually, I lost all outer consciousness and sat in deep meditation, feeling unspeakable joy within. I don't know how long I stayed in that condition. After some time, the master touched my chest again and brought me back to outer consciousness. He then asked me about my experience, and I told him about my blissful experience during meditation. He was very pleased. He told me to meditate every morning and again every night before I went to bed, and to report to him my visions and spiritual experiences. Then the master asked me to go to the Kali temple and bow down and meditate there. He then gave me prasad and told me to come again. He said, don't worry about the expense. The carriage fare is this, the boat, he was very practical. Sri Ramakrishna was extremely practical. Told him all the various ways to get there. A lot of people come here, you can hitch a ride with them sometimes. If you have any difficulty with the expense, you get the money from here. On my way back home, I thought of the Master's overwhelming love and compassion. So, Kali got right into the mix. Okay, so this is a reminiscence about M, the recorder of the Mahendranath Gupta, the recorder of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. After I got acquainted with Mahendra Master, he said, Kali, you should write down the teachings of Paramahansa Deva as you hear them. I put them down in my diary, but I'm so busy with various kinds of work in my household and teaching at school, I don't find time to come much. You spend much more time in Sri Ramakrishna's company, and for that reason, I tell you, write down his extraordinary teachings. At this, I started writing down the nectar-like words of Paramahamsa Deva. But after some time, I thought, what good is it to write down all this on paper if I don't build up my life according to the teachings? From that time, I began to record the teachings on the screen of my heart instead of writing them on paper, so that his teachings might remain imprinted forever. And then I thought this was very interesting. You see, when Kali got acquainted, he became like Latu, kind of an attendant. He'd go with Sri Ramakrishna wherever he went. So I was present during most of the occasions described in the Kathamrita by Mahendranath Gupta, but my name was not mentioned in all places, perhaps because I was young in age, and so I got lumped in with etc. Present were, so-and-so, so-and Latu, Rakal, etc. Of course, I mentioned this to Sri M on many occasions when he was alive, but for some reason unknown to me, the Master has left me within the bounds of etc. Now, this is one other experience that he had while he was attending on Sri Ramakrishna and living at home before Sri Ramakrishna got his terminal illness. Swami Abhedananda writes, I've already mentioned that every day during meditation at home, I used to have visions of gods and goddesses. One night during the small hours when I was in meditation, I lost outer consciousness, and it seemed as though my soul came out of the cage of this body and began to roam about in the sky above like a free bird. Gradually, the soul flew high towards infinity. While viewing scenery of great beauty, I entered that place and was astonished to see images arranged in rows depicting the ideals of various religions and religious sects. I was charmed to see the different ideals and emblems of Shakta, Shaiva, Vaishnava, Ganapatya, Christianity, Islam, and other religions and views. Gradually, as if charged with supernal inspiration, I then entered a big hall and saw all the gods and goddesses, all incarnations of God, all founders of religion, mainly the 10 incarnations of the Hindus, Sri Krishna, Jesus Christ, Zarathustra, Muhammad, Moses, and in those rooms, and in the center of the hall, Sri Ramakrishna was standing. I was looking at this strange scene when Sri Ramakrishna's form became luminous and assumed immense proportion, and all gods and goddesses, all incarnations, fish, tortoise, Sri Ramachandra, Buddha, and others of the incarnations, Sri Krishna, Jesus Christ, Zarathustra, Nanak, Sri Chaitanya, Shankaracharya, and others, left their respective altars and started entering into Sri Ramakrishna's body. Having failed to understand the significance of that supernal vision, I went to Dakshineswar as soon as I could and narrated the whole event to Sri Ramakrishna. Hearing me, he said, "You've had the vision of Vaikuntha, the heavenly abode of God. You've reached the last limit of vision of gods and goddesses. From now onwards, you will be uplifted to the stage of the formless. And it is strange," he continues, "that I cease to have any vision of gods and goddesses during meditation after the vision narrated above, and my mind would remain calm from that point on, all through my meditation." So he's lifted to the stage of the formless. It doesn't mean he was lifted to the nirvikalpa stage, but he was lifted to this stage beyond form, but with quality. Later on, I describe my experience of this strange vision of Vaikuntha in the Ramakrishna Avatara, which I composed in Sanskrit. You know, I find these little tidbits charming. You see how Sri Ramakrishna changed this young man's life, how he came here to him at a certain stage, and then he just kind of kept jumping him up, to the next quantum level. And then also forming this group, connecting his disciples with one another in various ways. So this is about Purnachandra Ghosh, who was one of the young men that came to Sri Ramakrishna that he designated as an Ishwara Koti, a special manifestation of God. Paramahamsa one day said to me, "A boy named Purna comes here. He's a very good boy. He reminds me of the baby of the boy Krishna, and I have a desire to feed him. He lives near you. And he goes to the Oriental Seminary. After school is over, you will call him to your house, and on my behalf, you will feed him with the sandesh which I shall give you. Will you be able to do that? You will act as my messenger." He then handed me the food. I came home, and after the school was over, I met Purna, called him to our home, seated him in my room, and with my own hand fed him with mango and sandesh, given by Paramahamsa Deva. Purna was so glad to eat it, he said, "Ah, how kind and affectionate is Ramakrishna. His affection and love are even greater than those of parents, putting you to so much trouble just to feed me." Saying this, Purna's eyes glistened with tears. From that day, we became friends. Well, I'm sorry, I haven't even gotten Kali out of Dakshineswar yet. I'll have to do something about that. This is something else that we're familiar with, but from a different angle, you see. Swami Abhedananda was present at many of the events that are described by him in the gospel, but it's a different viewpoint, and you get slightly different understanding of things. One day I went to Dakshineswar. It was about 2 p.m. Girish Chandra Ghosh came to see the Paramahamsa completely drunk. All those present, including myself, were frightened to see Girish in this drunken condition. But Sri Ramakrishna was not the least perturbed and addressed him as a partial manifestation of Bhairava, that is, a sadhaka of the heroic mode, and begin to sing a song of Ram Prasad. "I drink no ordinary wine. I take the name and glory of Mother Kali. And I make my drunkard mind intoxicated with divine love. And then I call them drunkards who get intoxicated by taking wine. With his head on the feet of the Paramahamsa, Girish Babu, crying plaintively, said, "Save me through your grace." Ramakrishna went into ecstasy and in that state began to talk to the mother. Mother, Girish, being a devotee of the heroic mode, will not be able to do all those things, the rules and injunctions that most devotees do. He came back to normal consciousness, stared at Girish Babu, and asked him to give the power of attorney, Bakalama. At the behest of Ramakrishna, Girish did just that. And Girish Babu's intoxication also disappeared instantly, and he began to talk to the devotees assembled there in a normal way. So this is another view of something that we get. The fact that when he gave the power of attorney, that alcohol-induced drunkenness in which he could be abusive and very difficult just went away. So, okay, we're going to jump ahead. We're going to jump ahead quite a bit. We're going to go to New York City, September 27th, 1897. Swami Saradananda had been working in America for about a year. Swami Abhedananda had just come in August of 1897, and this is their first meeting. Finally, the day came. Saradananda came to New York, and I'm reading from a recent biography of Swami Saradananda that was put together by Vandana Jani. It's about 800 pages, and I'd never seen this incident before. Saradananda came to New York on September 27th and calmly knocked on Swami Abheda's door at Mary Phillips boarding house. Sarat and Kali, two friends and brother disciples, met after 2 years. How could one describe their joy and happiness? In an entirely unknown world, the two friends met heartily. Abhedananda wrote, "I spent the whole day with Sarat, talking on different subjects, especially the work he had been doing in America. It was a great delight to me to meet my beloved Guru Bhai after such a long time and in a foreign country. It reminded me of the days when we lived together, served our Divine Master in Kasipur Garden House near Calcutta, and after his Mahasamadhi, how we lived together with Vivekananda, who used to call us Kelua and Bulua, for we were Vivekananda's personal attendants as well as his staunch followers in all struggles for spiritual attainments at the Bharanagar Math. How we traveled together to Puri, that is Sarat and I, and lived together accompanied by Swami Premananda for 6 months at Imar Math of Sri Ramanuja, that's dedicated to the Vashishtadvaita, the qualified non-dualist sect. The two Swamis reminisced about instances of the travels that they'd taken together. Abhedananda said, "Do you remember, brother, how we once tried to drink the milk of a tigress?" Saradananda said, "Yes, how brave of us to run away before she ate us." Abhedananda also remembered painful times. "Brother, remember how you nursed me with the greatest brotherly love at Alambazar Math." "When was that?" Saradananda said, "Remember the 4 months at Alambazar when I had 7 surgeries on my left foot on account of an attack of those guinea worms." Saradananda, remembering his brother's pain, said, "I have seen that, brother. You were in so much pain. Those worms." Swami Abhedananda made a face as if he was still experiencing it. I had gotten one worm in my foot while traveling barefoot through Gujarat to Dwarka and Prabhastirtha on pilgrimage. He paused for a while, and Abhedananda said, all these and many other memories of our lives together in India have become vivid upon seeing you, brother. Abhedananda felt that by the will of our great master, we come to New York after traveling 12,000 miles, crossing many seas and the Atlantic Ocean, on the same mission to preach the liberal, life-giving ideals of Sri Ramakrishna. Sardananda saw that his beloved Guru Bhai was ready to live here in America amid all kinds of sufferings and hardship. That readiness was needed to survive here in America. And he really was. He came to this country with a lot of books but no money. He missed his connections that first trip when the boat docked. Somehow got a carriage and got to the rooming house. Got himself oriented, starting the work. He was living alone, not much money, and he was still getting people coming to his talks. That part of the work was working, but it was his habit to always be at his appointments punctually. So one winter day in February, there was a blizzard. The wind was 60 miles an hour. The pipes froze, and he went through knee-deep snow to get to this huge lecture hall that normally would have a couple hundred people. There were 5 people there, but he arrived punctually. This was his spirit, same kind of spirit that he had when he was traveling throughout India. You know, this kind of adherence to truth and the ideal, and this kind of, he's going to make the monkey perform, meaning the body, and do what it needed to do. The little room in Mary Phillips' boarding house felt the subtle vibrations of the comforting talks between these 2 disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, and they felt as if the Master were there smiling and blessing them. The next day, while eating lunch, Sardananda told Abhedananda that if possible, it would be good to remain a vegetarian. They were both vegetarians. Speaking casually, he also said that the American people had a genuine interest in Vedanta, and especially the Raja Yoga. So Abhedananda took both of these things to heart and used Swami Vivekananda's translation and commentary on the Raja Yoga as a textbook throughout his stay in the West. And he actually got into trouble being a vegetarian and leading the physically austere life that he did in America, and putting himself through all these things and making the monkey perform so well. So he got a little bit under the weather, and the news got back to Holy Mother. And this is the letter that she wrote him in March of 1899, 8/1 Bagbazar Street, Calcutta. Dear son, I was pleased to receive your letter yesterday with the happy news that you are well. I have received the parcel sent by you, and am very happy to learn that you are well and all right, both physically and mentally, and that your work is going on well. You, sons, have added glory to the name of the Lord. I always pray to the Lord, and I bless you, that you may be crowned with success. I have no doubt he will help you in this great mission. Now, it should be mentioned that Abhedananda would scrape together funds and send them to Holy Mother. You know, he had access to American dollars. And there's one note in his diary, he said, yesterday sent $175 and so many cents to Holy Mother. That was a lot of money in those days, and he could have used it himself. He had a great devotion for Holy Mother. Do not be so strict about food. In that country, you should take good meat instead of purely vegetarian food. There will be nothing wrong in that. And since I am giving you permission, you may take the food without the least hesitation. Always take care of your health. You should retire into solitude at times, and also write me occasionally about your health. My blessings to you, your mother. So that was, fortunately, Holy Mother, I don't know how many letters she wrote, but, that's, I don't know, that touched me, that she's thinking of his welfare, telling them that he can take whatever food he needs to take in America and need not worry about any nagging feelings of guilt from his early conditioning. He says, don't worry, I'm telling you, you can do it. Forget about all those things. Do it. So, and one interesting thing I ran into, a couple of interesting things that I want to share with you. Swami Abhedananda was just so I guess adaptable to the American situation and the Western situation. I want to read an article from one of the newspapers, 1900. He's still getting the work started there. On January 25th, 1900, Swami Abhedananda started the Young Men's Yoga Association, the YMYA in New York. A children's class was also established in January of 1900 to train young minds in higher thinking through India's repository of parables and stories. Swami Turiyananda, who is now with Swami Abhedananda, assisted in this aspect of the work. The class was reviewed in the New York Herald of March 4th, 1900. Title: New York's Juvenile Vedantists, Little Ones Learning Brahmanism. Not the least among the extraordinary things of these times is the realization that India, the land of the heathen and benighted, according to popular impression among our people, is sending missionaries of the Hindu religion into the very core and heart of our Western civilization. Here in New York, a few picturesque monks have banded together a society for the propagation of their religion and philosophy, which is taking such deep root and spreading so rapidly that children in this city are being reared and trained in the Hindu faith and are sent every week to sit at the feet of the Swamis to learn wisdom and grace. Every Saturday afternoon, a class of young boys and girls gathers together in the rooms of the Vedanta Society in East 55th Street to speak an hour or so with the Swami Abhedananda and drink in the teachings of the Hindu philosophy, which is expounded to them in the most fascinating way. The young people come in with beaming, expectant faces and draw their chairs around the handsome oriental figure of the Swami, who sits in the middle of the circle, wearing a robe of rich red and holding in his hand an ancient Sanskrit book, the Hitopadesha, the Book of Good Counsel. It dates back to the 13th century BC and is the source of many of our Western fables of animals and our fairy tales. The life and teachings of Jesus enter largely into the text of the Vedanta philosophy, and never a lesson goes by but that some saying of Jesus Christ or some incident in his life is used to illustrate a moral lesson or point out a principle. The Swami selects a story every Saturday afternoon from the Hitopadesh and tells it to the children. The stories are all about kings and queens and animals who converse freely together upon subjects of astounding range for young minds. But the children sit in rapt attention, eager for every word. Woven into the glittering fabric of wonder and imagination are all the doctrines of the Vedas, such ideas as reincarnation, karma, and yoga, with bits of wit, wisdom, and good advice, which will linger, doubtless, in these young minds during all their lives. The Swami ends the story and then follows with a little talk about it. And then here you get an insight into his method of teaching. And then Swami says a few words about it. And then each child is asked to repeat the story in his or her own way and to tell the moral lessons and reflections which it has given to him or her. It is wonderful to see how much of the real meaning of the tales makes its way into their heads and how eager they are for more. A philosophy such as Vedanta, which calms and embraces all religions, is a little wide for the minds of most grown-ups, but these young ones seem to take to it with avidity. When the children's class was first formed, the mamas and aunties were allowed to come in with the children. It soon became evident that the older folk were too eager to take part in the lessons and absorb the attention of the Swami, so that the little ones had no chance. Now all the grown-ups are excluded, and the Swami and the children have things all their own way. So, now we're a little over, but I just want to mention one other thing that I found very interesting. In let's see, 1898, again, this is early on in his work, he was in Boston and was introduced to William James and Josiah Royce and Professor Landman, professor of Sanskrit at Harvard, and all these big academic guns. And William James admired the work of the Swamis, but his philosophy was a little different. He couldn't accept Advaita. So there's this little story. The Swami and Dr. Louis Janes sat in on the last class of the semester of both Royce and William James. And William James, you could do that on the last class when they summed up the whole semester. And William James, seeing Swami in the audience with Dr. Janes, must have switched topics, and he tore into non-dualism and attacked it left and right and left and right. And Swami Abhedananda just made a note of his points, and then afterwards he greeted the Swami and asked him to speak on unity the next Sunday. And Swami said, well, my topic is different, it's been announced, but let me see. If you come to the talk, I'll figure out a way to switch the topic, and I'll speak on unity and variety. So that happened. Dr. James brought his students, and then Swami Abhedananda very coolly went through all of Dr. William James' objections to Advaita and demolished them in his lecture. Dr. James opened it up for questions. Professor James, who was sitting with his students, prompted them. You ask this question, you ask that question. Whispering. After I had answered several questions of his students, Dr. James said, the Swami will be very happy if Professor James puts questions directly. The professor replied, it was not his place to put questions. At the close of the meeting, Professor James shook hands with me and congratulated me for my lucid and logical discourse, and then invited me for lunch the next day. At lunch the next day at his house, there was Professor Royce, Professor Landman, Professor Shaler, William James, and then Dr. William James, Dr. James, different people, and the Swami. So after lunch, Professor James started a discussion against unity because he believed in the plurality of the infinite and was totally against the idea of the unity of ultimate truth of the universe. I, on the other hand, supported Advaita and refuted his arguments one after another. The discussion lasted 4 hours, in which Professor Royce, Professor Landman, Professor Shaler, and Dr. James supported my arguments against Professor James. Now, at the end of the discussion, according to Swami Gambhirananda, his short biography of Swami Abhedananda, Professor James said, "Swami, I can't counter your arguments for non-dualism. I just don't believe them." It was a tough one. So I will close. There's more material, and if you're interested, we can talk about that in the library, but we have to close. So I'll close with the prayer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This ever-changing, interdependent universe of things and beings is infinite. That self-existent, unchanging spiritual reality is infinite. This ever-changing diversity, having come from that unchanging spiritual reality, that reality remains undivided, unchanged, perfect, complete, infinite. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.